Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to today's HDI webinar, Understanding Dependencies, Better Service Through Configuration Management. Today's webinar is brought to you by BMC and RightStar. I'm Roy Atkinson, and I'll be your moderator today, and we have just a few announcements before we get started. If you're experiencing any technical problems, refresh your browser first, and then you can seek online assistance from BrightTalk. You can participate in the Q&A session by asking questions at any time during the webcast, and they'll be answered during the Q&A session at the end of the webcast. You'll be able to download the slides from today's presentation by opening the Attachments tab on your BrightTalk screen. The slides will advance automatically throughout the event. Remember that today's webinar will be available on demand shortly after the completion of this live webcast, and you'll receive an email reminder to let you know it's available. Today we have Ryan Ogilvie and Joy Sue as our featured presenters. Remember that you can connect with HDI on Twitter, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, and on our members-only community site, HDI Connect. Okay, we're about ready to get started now. Ryan Ogilvie is a service management consultant in Calgary, Alberta, with Blackfriar Consulting, Inc. His main focus is to help clients create business value for themselves and customers by leveraging service management best practices. Aside from his own blog, Service Management Journey, he has guest blogged for TSO, AITS.org, and various ITSM vendors, as well as presenting for ITSMF and Pink Elephant. He's a frequent poster in the HDI Professional Association group on LinkedIn, I might add. Thanks for being here today, Ryan, and it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Roy. First of all, I'd like to thank HDI for providing me the opportunity to speak today. Thanks to Roy for facilitating, and thanks to our sponsors for allowing me the opportunity to share some information with you. I'd also like to thank all those attending for taking time out of your busy schedules to hopefully gain some insights on configuration management. Okay, so when we're talking about configuration management, what is it really? And we have a link here for Axelos. It's the process responsible for ensuring that the assets required to deliver services are properly controlled, and that accurate and reliable information about those assets is available when and where it is needed. This information includes details of how the assets have been configured and the relationship between assets. Okay? So, in other words, what we're talking about is, governing your stuff. Let's go back a slide there. So the goal of configuration management, now that we know what configuration management is supposed to do, we need to outline what those goals actually are. So if we actually break down that definition, we'll see that the goals are actually embedded within there. So we want to ensure, first of all, that there is governance over the assets which deliver those services. We want to ensure that the information about those assets is accurate and available when needed. And we want to gain some value from readily available, reliable information. So, the bad rap of the CMDB, or Configuration Management Database. While configuration management doesn't always necessarily equal CMDB, we certainly can't talk about configuration management without talking about a CMDB. So for those of you that think that ITIL is a four-letter word, CMDB can take that to a whole other level. Several analyst firms will tell you that approximately 80 to 85% of CMDB projects fail. So the question you're asking yourself, and those of you that are attending are probably interested in, so why should we do this at all? Well, there's several reasons that we should be looking at this. These seemingly doomed projects tend to fail, and why many of them relate to each other. The reason that these things don't work out so well in many cases is we have a lack of best practices to start with. And around that, we have no automation. We have an overly manual approach. So without the right tools to enable the efficient creation and maintenance of our CMDB, Many companies find the level of tedious manual work required to complete and maintain the CMDB to be just unmanageable. In many cases, they're poorly governed, they have inaccurate data, and then they're abandoned. So all intentions are good at the start, but then things go a little bit sideways, and it just kind of compounds from there because they don't have the best practices or automation to start with. One other thing people will mention is that they just don't have enough people or limited resources. If they're like the above and they're doing some manual work, there are generally limitations on staffing and budget that prevent the CMDB from getting off the ground. Say, well, we just don't have the people or the time. Other production projects take precedence. So in many cases, a CMDB may sit off to the side. I worked at one organization where they said, well, we'd like to do the CMDB. Can't we just do CMDB Lite, where it's, an off the desk, side the desk activity, and we can just kind of work on it like that. In many cases, that won't work, obviously, because we're not putting focus where focus is required. Following up on that, there's no clear direction or strategy. Since a CMDB would be most critical in some kind of disaster events or things like that where we want to know what happened or what we have, companies adopt that it'll never happen here thinking. And so the CMDB project falls off the radar screen. It gets pushed to the back burner. Bad marketing is an IT's nightmare. IT is not particularly well known for its marketing prowess, so it's an imperative to understand the risks and benefits and market the project in a way that outlines how bad things will be if we don't do something. So for the most part, what we don't think about is the marketing part, where really people have a bad taste in their mouth from previous experiences, and if we're having 85% of projects fail, they say, well, it failed already once, I don't want to do this again, and that bad marketing is left in their mouths. So, if 85% fail and 15% of CMD projects succeed, and when we look at those stats a little bit closer from places like from Gartner and Forrester and things like that, they're saying on average IT orgs fail CMD projects at least 3 times first. Why do we bother? Well, we need to look at this from a strategic planning perspective. And then strategic planning is going to add that value. And in a market that's tight, in my particular market space where we're working in the oil and gas sector, the energy sector, it's the competitive edge that we need to make sure that when prices of oil go down, that we have something that's going to bring us back to the table. So the trouble with showing return on investment for things like configuration management is that unlike other processes, we need to relate to other metrics to prove out that we are making a difference. And we'll delve into that in a few slides down the road here, but it's important that we make sure that we are measuring what we're doing so that we can show that return. Improved knowledge enables better decision making. Think about it in these terms. If I'm going to go to the store and I don't know what's in my fridge, I might not get the right things. Okay? Let's assume I don't have an Internet of Things refrigerator. I can't see what's inside my fridge. I can't have it emailing me what's in the fridge. I have to, by memory or guess, hope that I get the right things. On the other hand, if I had something emailing me and telling me, you have 3 eggs in the carton left, you have half a gallon of milk, or your milk is about to go bad, replace it, I would have that much better information to make better decisions, to purchase better groceries, to save myself money. So while it's a simplistic way of looking at things, this is what the business organization needs to look at when we're talking about our assets and configuration items. We need to make sure that we are positioned to be able to answer the right questions at the right time, to make the right decisions, to prove that value. And these are just kind of the beginning steps. So how do we get there? Okay. In basic terms, we need to look at some of these following things. We need to align our CMDB goals to business outcomes. And you hear a lot about that, where we need to make sure that we align or that we're in sync with our business outcomes. And there's no shortage of truth to that. So we need to make sure that what our business wants to do, that we are making sure that our IT goals align to those things, so that we can be successful, so that our business can be successful, and we can prove that value. We need to have some detailed information about those CIs, or the configuration items. What do those things mean? What do they look like? We also need to how to relate those CIs to each other and to the services that we're providing to the business. Okay, when we talk about that, we need to make sure that the services those items support. So in many cases, it's A to B to C situation. We want to make sure that we are able to report on those things, and we know what things touch which. So to break that down in a little bit more detail, when we're talking about aligning our CMDB goals to business outcomes, as I mentioned before, IT is famously well known for its marketing prowess. So we need to make sure we market this thing appropriately so we can avoid the CMDB failure zone, if you will. We need to outline what the business wants as its objectives, and we can relate some measurement to this and show how we are on track. When we say the business wants to make money, so if you're an organization and you say, well, if I ask my CFO, what is the business goal? And he says, well, it's to make money. Well, IT may be a cost center, and we're saying, well, IT doesn't generate funds of any kind. We need to be focusing on where we can save money. So we're from a cost-centric perspective, we're saving money to generate that value. And when we're talking about generating value, we're talking about the reduction of incidents, potentially. Things are breaking, it's preventing us from doing business. There's no value in incident, but we need to put value in front of reducing those incidents and measuring that. Part and parcel to doing that is improved problem management. So if you're doing problem management now, then great, you can leverage that to reduce those incidents further. If you're not doing any sort of formalized problem management, this is something you should be looking at. A lot of companies focus on incidents because that's just what they do. It's a very hero worship type situation with incidents, firefighter mentality. But we need to make sure we're focused on problem management. And to be able to do problem management properly, you really need to know what makes up your environment, and that's where the CMDB or configuration management comes into play. We need to reduce failed changes. So many times our failed changes, they kind of go into that trifecta of incident and problem. So we need to make sure we reduce any failed changes where we can. We need to really understand the environment. So when we're talking about Service X, we really need to know what makes Service X tick. What is the things that make Service X go? Is there something that, if it's load balanced or if it's clustered, that it's going to survive any kind of impact? Or we say, we didn't realize, but there's a lot of single points of failure here, and we can see it in our business service mapping within tool sets that outlines that, hey, we have some risks here. And overall, we're looking at ultimately improving the customer experience. So when we're talking about all these things, a happy customer is good and your happy business is good, but making sure that the business outcomes are satisfied, and those will improve the customer experience as it applies to them, the business. So how do we get there? Okay. When we're talking about detailed information on our CIs or configuration items, take a close look, an honest look at where you are currently. So when I say honest, many people will say, and I've seen it before, I've talked with operations managers where they'll say, well, we're pretty good, we've got this thing pretty sorted out, we've got applications that manage this, we're really not too worried about our end, it's more this end that we're worried about. We need to take an honest look. And sometimes that will require an objective viewpoint to get this done right. It may take an external set of eyes to look at this thing and say, okay, well, here's where your CMDB or your configuration management line up as we speak. It may not be as mature as people think, and it may well be. But those are the things we need to outline. And sometimes having someone from the outside perspective, whether you have a consultant come in and does a quick assessment, those kinds of things will help you get a real objective look at where you're at. And that's super important so that you can start off on the right foot. We need to outline a process for our configuration management. So people will say, well, we have assets that are in a tool. We don't really need a process. They're just there. We need to make sure that we outline what that process looks like from the time that it's put into the system to the time that it's removed from the system, whether it's retired or if it's disposed of. We need to know what that looks like. And some organizations I've worked with, they say, well, we had this process, this is what we were working with, and they slam this huge binder on my desk and say, we printed it for you to kind of review. And when you look at it, you say, well, here's part of the reason you weren't successful previously. It's because this was just way too complicated. It was fraught with errors from the start, too complicated. Always keep things as simple as possible to attain your goals. So if you have 50 steps to get to the fridge, or 2 steps to get to the fridge, you're more likely to get there in 2 steps than you are with 50. There's a lot more room for error. We want to keep the information as reliable and accurate as possible. So this is where your automation will come in. So your infrastructure team is likely managing this information already through some kind of tool set. They may have some kind of discovery tool or whatever that might look like. They're hosting their information. They may even be doing alerts from them for event management, things like that. So these are the things that we want to make sure that we have at the ready so that we can have that reliable information and find out where that's coming from. So we want to limit scope. Scope is the backbreaker, and everyone knows this. It's the backbreaker of all things project related, but no more so than with CMDB or configuration management. And the reason that this is usually the backbreaker is because there is so many things we could figure out about a configuration items that people will say, well, what about we had this, and when we just had that, maybe we expanded this service, and maybe we expanded those services, and before long you're boiling the ocean, and it gets way out of control, it gets overly complicated, and it fails. Okay, and some of you that have done this before say, yeah, this is exactly what's happened. Things get out of control really quickly when we're talking about scope. So we need to find the balance on what is really required and what value we'll gain for CI and the information we're going to gather. So we need to define the optimum level of CI. What level of information is available through automation and what CI attributes will you need to maintain. So we may not need to know all the details right off the bat. So in our initial, whether we do this in phases or components of how we release this, we may want to look at, here's our top 10 services that really drive the business value. And here's the key information to start with that we need to maintain those particular top 10 services. When we have that, we're able to start with something and report on some success and some wins and build some kind of momentum. When we start simple, we can see those things. If we start big, it's very difficult. It usually takes a long time. People get impatient, and these things fall apart. So we need to make sure that we know what's just enough for us. In some organizations, that's going to be a lot more information. In some organizations, it's going to be a lot less. So it's going to be business-based per organization and understand what those things look like. We want to make sure that we understand the similarities and differences between assets and configuration items. So in some organizations, they interchange the terms. We need to know what those defined terms really are. What are we talking about when we say assets? Are we talking about laptops and desktops? Are we talking software? When we talk about configuration items, are we talking about servers? Are we talking about services? Things like that. So we just need to know what the differences are and what we're actually talking about when we're talking about our scope. I worked with one organization at one point where they had brought me on as a CMDB consultant. And they said, well, here's the things that we're looking to do. And everything that they talked about was asset management. And so I said, well, first of all, are we talking about a CMDB and configuration management, or are we talking about asset management? They're slightly different things. And so what they were looking for was value as it pertained to assets. So we ended up working with that. But That's the thing we need to identify right off the bat. Everyone needs to have a consistent message on what we're really working with and what value and what that's going to drive. When we're thinking, the kind of the rule of thumb is configuration items life cycles usually only pertain to productive life, so operational, and doesn't include things like procurement or disposal necessarily. So kind of keep those things in mind when we're talking about what that looks like. How do CIs relate to each other and to the services? Okay, so now that we know what a CI is, we need to know how they all fit into the overall scheme of things. And by doing this, we have a better understanding of your environment. You know, in many cases, when I've worked with organizations, we have found that, you know, we had underused components. We actually drove out problems from greenlighting our CMDB. So when we did some business mapping, service mapping, we saw that, okay, well, things are routing, instead of going through the load balancer as we're supposed to, they seem to be going to box number 1 instead of box number 2. And we're seeing that this component was underused and actually tells us some information right off the bat. Visibility generates more questions than answers. And in some cases, and again, this comes back to the marketing thing, we need to make sure that there's nothing wrong with questions. People say, well, they didn't know the answers. This can't be good. We need to know all the answers. And in IT particularly, we get really hung up on needing to know all the time. What we really need to focus those on is the knowledge management component of it and just understanding what this looks like. We may not even realize that an application is made up of certain resources. So if we have questions about it, we have learned something, and as long as we action what we learn, then we are already generating some level of value. Okay? The ability to understand what the environment looks like will allow us to tie in things like change management, incident management, and problem management, because we'll see where things are happening, what things may need to be adjusted, and where we can make some corrections. And allowing us to do that will take us a lot further towards our business objectives than we will if we don't have any kind of configuration management. Right? So how do we get there? So services, those items support. You know, if a picture speaks 1,000 words, end-to-end service maps are essential to improving service quality. When we see what we can see, even someone that isn't technically, you know, focused will be able to tell you, okay, well, in this particular picture here, I've got two web servers that run the application, and it's also tied in with a messaging server. So this is what makes it work. This is what makes it go. If I was to take away the messaging server, whether the Exchange 01 is working or not, it's not going to do any messaging. Like, it doesn't take rocket science to figure these things out. When you see the big red X, you know it's not good. So making sure that we are in position to see those things in a simplistic way allows us to discover the entire data center and maintain some level of service models. Oops. Sorry about that. Automating whenever possible. So we need to make sure that we can walk before we run. Likely you have several tools at your disposal to accomplish this, but in some cases, many IT organizations are tracking their assets using manual, maybe even paper-intensive processes. These sorts of things are filled with inaccuracies and consistencies. Spreadsheets are used by many IT teams to manually enter details of the assets, and then they constantly have to modify the assets to the update. So there's, while they may have a good process for doing that, there's loads of places where this thing can go off the rails, and as soon as your information's incorrect, the whole thing starts to go sideways. So we want to make sure that we make sure that we have the simplistic form first, and we're not overboiling the ocean. Automation will enable scalability. So with the pace that enterprise networks are growing and IT systems are getting updated, having an automated asset management method or big management method is a must to make sure that we keep abreast of all the things that are asset updates and changes. So when we position ourselves to have some automation to allow us to do that, it's going to save us manual effort, which is time, and results in less errors and personal overheads. So anytime we can get that automation right, we're going to be way ahead of the game. We also need to make sure that we validate the automation. Because we're looking to have reliable and accurate information, we need to make sure that we validate that it is in fact the case. If there's something wrong with our systems and we're relying on them to do that, we need to make sure that we are keeping on top of those as well. Because if we don't, then we could end up back in the same loop. With any good initiative to improve, we always need to make sure that we look at continual service improvements. In many cases, in many projects I've worked on, they're good to put things, the design component's good, and the transition operations is good, but then it's like, okay, now the project's done, great success, it's all good. But we need to make sure that we have a way to measure what we're doing, make some improvements, and keep that cycle going. So it's super important to have CSI built into these things. No matter what model we're using, we want to make sure, there's many different CSI models we could use. We need to make sure that we determine what should be measured. Okay? What do we want to measure? Keep it simple. Again, it comes back to the marketing. Here's the two things we want to make sure we're getting right. Measure them and see where we're at. Decide what can be measured. In some cases, some things are not going to be easily measured. So we need to make sure that, those things that can't be measured, we have a vehicle for those, and the things that can be measured can be shared. We want to gather, process, and analyze that data. So as we're measuring it, we're gathering it, we're looking at it, analyzing it, then we can move on to plan and implementing any changes that we need. So we may, right off the first 3 months, identify, well, what we thought we might see, we didn't quite see, but we saw some other side effect or some other thing that's popped out. And that's perfectly fine, as long as we identify what that is, plan for those things, and implement those changes. We can kind of adapt and grow from there. And when we're investigating and diagnosing, so it's putting us right back into the causal loop where we go back and then eventually determine what we measure. So we should be looping back, wash, rinse, repeat, so to speak. Make sure that we're making those service improvements. Finally, a couple of things to watch out for. Just kind of these are just some cautionary tales. Just, failing to identify your goals and benefits for your CMDB. If you don't identify what the goals are, you're really starting off on the wrong foot. So make sure you identify what the goal is. Keep it simple. Being light on the process and training. So people always forget to, people understand the process. Well, we wrote a process document. Hopefully people are reading it. Maybe they'll learn something from it, and that's the training we're going to provide them. We really need to make sure to get this thing right that everyone understands the process, everyone understands the training, everyone understands how it works, and we're going to be a lot further ahead. We want to make sure that we avoid turning the CMDB into a garbage dump. So garbage in, garbage out, we don't want. Have a purpose for your CMDB, make sure it lines up to your goals, and it'll show some benefits. We want to ignore the need for effective change management. So, oddly, in many cases, people will put a CMDB in almost, let's say, here's our project group and here's our operational group, and we'll silo them away from everyone else. No, they should be interacting with the rest of service management people, and especially change management, so that when we change something in our configuration items, that they are in fact being changed. We're measuring it, and we can see where those things are translating. We want to make sure that we, watch out for proceeding without buy-in from stakeholders. In some cases, organizations say, we need this, we need to do it. We don't, kind of not really sure if we want to, but we need to do it. It's what we need to do. Just do it. But if we're not really getting buy-in from the stakeholders, we're starting ourselves off on that wrong foot. So we need to make sure that people understand why we're doing it, the benefits that we're getting, potentially the pain points if we don't do it, and market it a little bit better. And another thing the final thing to watch out for is attempting a broad implementation. So we want to make sure that when we're implementing configuration management, that we want to make sure that we watch out for that scope creep. It is a backbreaker. Focus on what you're going to implement. Stick to that focus, and you'll be able to get the results and value that you're hoping to achieve through your configuration management process. And with that, I'm going to throw it back to Roy, and I thank you once again for giving me the time to speak today.
Great job, Brian. Thank you so much. And our second speaker today is Joy Sue, who is a Principal Solutions Marketing Manager at BMC. She's responsible for developing marketing strategy and plans for discovery, client management, and CMDB. She joined BMC in May of 2016 and has over 13 years of industry experience. She loves bringing products to market and creating excitement through campaigns and events. Joy holds a BS and MBA from the Haas School of Business at the University of California, Berkeley. And she currently resides in San Jose, California with her husband and 2 boys. Nice little tidbit of information about you, Joy. Thanks for being here. Take it away.
Thank you, Roy, and thank you to HDI for having me here, and thank you to all of you participating on our webinar. Today, I'm here to share with you the backbone to configuration management. So in order to really step up your game in doing configurations management, you need to be able to discover your CIs and really understand what's there. I'm here to share with you the reason why that's important and how BMC Discovery can help. Regardless of where your company is at in terms of digital transformation, there's 3 key goals I'd like you to keep in mind as we go through this presentation. I'd like you to think about being lean. There's always the pressure of cost cutting or staying thin. And as you implement any solutions, think about being lean. Being secure is important because it protects your company. It protects your company from threats, protects your company from failing audits, and it keeps you safe. And being agile is so critical in today's digital age. You want to be able to move quickly with the information given. And with digital transformation comes data. There's so much data thrown at you all the time. And what I'm here to say is, don't make decisions in the dark. Don't make decisions based on assumptions and perceptions. You want to leverage the information that you have so you could gather it and make intelligent and smart decisions. And you get the information all of the time. How do you know what is good information? Well, you need to know how all of the information is grouped and how they're dependent on each other. Here is a map of what BMC Discovery can find for you. BMC Discovery can find thousands of relationships, hundreds of middleware, 15 DevOps technology. We've discovered over 40,000 software versions, over 3,000 network devices, and over 20 storage brands. And this can be mapped for you within most of your applications within 15 minutes. And it can also show you your services and how they're interlinked with each other. And why does this matter? In our roles, results speak for everything. I'm sure you have the pressure to either cut incident change time or to cut costs or to reduce volumes. Let me tell you about a couple of stories from a couple of customers that I've had recently. One of our leading providers of IT consultant services have saved over $230 million by using Discovery to replace their manual processes for software auditing. Another one of my customers in Europe, who is a supplier of electric, gas, wind, and solar energy, reduced their Oracle license expenses renewal rate by 72% through a better understanding of their Oracle license position and a better management of their licensing in terms of partitioning of users. Results is critical, so always think about what are you trying to achieve and how can we do it better. So I've touched a little bit about what BMC Discovery is, but how do we do it? BMC Discovery is able to map your application starting from anywhere within your topography. Pick an area you're most comfortable with. So if you're a configurations manager, You may start at various software products or instances and branch out from there. You could branch out to servers, middlewares, or load balancers. The information is then presented to you in a graph shown in the slide here. And then you could clean up the areas that is less relevant to you, and then you could publish the results to your management or to your peers. We've been discovering dependency mapping for over 10 years. And over these years, we've gathered information that can really help discover information about your data centers and its dependencies. And this data is constantly updated every month through our technology knowledge updates. So something that's here 1 month, the list will keep growing each month. And we have an easy-to-use interface that is action-driven. So depending on the role that you play within the tool, you can get the info that you need all within 3 clicks. So you may need modeling of the application, or maybe you want to administer the products to get to the answer that you need. And you can get to it within 3 clicks. Super quick, super easy. And recently, we've added some additional inclusions to our base SKU. From a hardware perspective, we've added hardware reference data for over 27 manufacturers and various server models and configurations to identify inefficiencies within our software. From a software perspective, we can find the end-of-life dates or end-of-supports time for softwares and operating systems. And if you take a look at the green circle to your right, you will see the number of products that we support. We're also making a security play here with the National Vulnerability Database info. We've enriched it with software data from the CPE, and this will help assist security operations in identifying dependencies associated to vulnerabilities. Some of you may want to discover assets within storage as well, and we have an add-on SKU that is discovery for storage. And the benefits of doing so is that, first, it aligns your storage team with your ITSM and ITOM processes so that all of the data is discovered in one area, and you see how they are all dependent upon each other. Second, apart from inventory, it also provides awareness of what is linking to them and what host may be using the solution so you can plan storage, maintenance, and chargeback. And on the flip side, it can do the opposite and locate orphan storage. And lastly, it improves collaboration. So not only do storage engineers understand the situation, network and server engineers can all better collaborate because the data is all in one place where they can all see how their jobs are related to each other. And that's all the slides that I have for today. I'd like to thank you guys for spending your time here. And we can turn it back to Roy for questions.
Thanks very much, Joy. Great job. And I'm just going to leave your logo up there for a couple minutes while we look at some questions. And we did get a couple of great questions. This is the first one that came in this afternoon. This is, we struggle most with the different needs that incident management, single end user, has from a configuration management perspective compared to asset change and problem. Do you have any advice on how to handle these different needs? Ryan, I think that would be for you.
Sure. Maybe just read the first part of the question again, just so I make sure I get the right answer.
Sure. Struggling with the different needs of incident management has from configuration management perspective compared to asset change and problem. So looking at it from the end user perspective as opposed to looking at, I think, from the service management perspective is what they're getting at here.
Sure, and I think, and I'll try to answer this as best I can, obviously without knowing the organization, but I think primarily the problems that we experience with the way that we deliver the services and the experience that people see versus what we see in service management reporting is that they're disparate because we're really not focused on looking at it from the business perspective. So I think collaborating with all those service management components, and whether you have some kind of BRM or some kind of business-facing liaison or whatever that might look like, just touching back with the business to find out if we're actually moving the needle in the right direction. In many cases, we say, well, we're reducing incidents or we're creating problems to reduce those incidents. But the business is like, yeah, well, these aren't really the things we were looking for. And we miss that mark because we're not having those discussions. So in many cases, I think that what we need to do is make sure that we identify those areas within config and change and problem and what those look like, and have some vehicle to discuss with the business what they're looking for and make sure that those things do line up. I'm not sure if that answers the question. Hopefully that does.
Great. Thanks, Ryan. I think this next question is for both of you. And it says, what is the cause of lack of automation built into the action plan of projects? I find that automation in projects that I've been involved in with the PM seem to be worried about automation, similar to the fear generated when the words "the cloud" are uttered. I like that one.
Maybe let Joy start.
All right. So
you see that in your
the first part?
Sure. The cause of lack of automation built into the action plan of projects. So it seems like the project managers are afraid of building automation into their plan.
It just depends on where you are in the digital transformation, and some companies just aren't quite there yet. And so there's this native fear of what we don't know, then we don't want to go toward it. And I think this is why I go back to don't make decisions in the dark. Because when you don't know and you're doing everything manually, you could miss something. Think about that. If you're doing things manually across all of your servers or your load balancers, and you don't know when you take one offline how that impacts down the chain, oh my goodness, that can really snowball. So my recommendation is really gather your data, automate it, because then you can have the best data in front of you so you can make decisions quickly.
Ryan, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, the only thing I would add is, again, it just comes back to the IT being bad at marketing. When they came up with it, whoever they coined that phrase, the cloud, they picked something that generated fear from the start. So I think people that were innovative from a technology perspective, it didn't matter what you would call it, they're just ready to hit the ground running, and automation is part of their lifespan. But some more of the organizations, they're very change adverse. They're a little bit nervous about what the cloud means, and you call it the cloud. I mean, it just doesn't even sound very inviting. So I think that fear is genuine. So we just need to kind of forget what the cloud really means, and focus on those benefits.
Yeah, good point. And exactly the same thing goes for automation. So thank you. Okay, next question. Can you speak to the application mapping and how that works? Is there some manual footprint work that's required to create an application's entry point for discovery? Joy, that's for you.
Absolutely. So the question is about how to start application mapping?
Right, and is there a manual footprint that's required to create an application entry point for discovery, or is it automatic? So
depending on where you are in the organization is where I say you can start it. Discovery will go into your system and find everything within your infrastructure. And then from then on, you want to say, okay, I would like to start with software, or I would like to start with a service, or I would like to start with mainframe. Depending on where you are, then we go out from there and we branch out. And depending on how many steps you want to see and how many steps outside of your organization you want to see, it'll do it for you automatically. The initial part will take a minimum of 15 minutes, and then it can discover everything within.
Cool. That's great. Thank you. Mm-hmm. And I think this question is for you, too. Does this work alongside CMDBs? Well, I would bet yes, but you can answer that question.
Well, actually, it's actually better than that. It's natively integrated with CMDBs. So it's automated. It's going to be automatic.
Mm-hmm. Cool. And what can the data be used for? I guess aside from the immediate bit of information, what else can you use the data that you get from this system for?
It could be used in a variety of areas, and there's so many. The top three that come to my mind include your ITSM, your ITOM processes, as well as your security environments.
Great, cool. Thank you. And I think this one is for Ryan. If you have attempted to start configuration management and failed in the past, nobody's ever done that, Ryan. How do you overcome the previous failures?
Well, I think the key is to, we've made some mistakes, and we've identified some mistakes. Everyone already knows what they already know. So we're really not keeping a secret from anyone. So outlining what those challenges were, and then identifying how we can overcome them is going to be key. So if we say, the last couple of times we did this and it didn't work, and here's why, well, we don't really want people to know. Well, there's nothing wrong with them knowing, because when they know that you'll know that you'll prevent it from happening the second time. So I think knowledge is power in those senses. So, identify what's wrong, make the corrective action that you need to, and move on.
Cool. And is CMDB, it's a kind of a generic term, and I know that, Joy, you talked a little bit a minute ago about how the BMC Discovery is part of the CMDB infrastructure and integrates with it. But CMDB being generic, is there any particular way that people should go about putting that together? Is automation the best? Ryan, you referred to it a few times, and Joy, that's pretty much what you talked about as well. Is there any other way, especially for a small organization, to get started?
Yeah, Ryan and I both agree, I think both from our presentations, that automation is the best, and there's different ways to go about that. I would say that doing it manually leads to mistakes, and mistakes happen over and over again, and it's not done consistently across different employees. So even if you're small, I would recommend finding a tool that works for you. Discovery works for small customers as well, to really start automating that process and to really understand what is within your CIs. Ryan, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think the only thing that I would add to that is, whether you're a really large organization or you're a small organization, your business objectives are always going to be king of the heap. So, identifying what you're looking to do is from a business perspective. In many cases, one of those business objectives will be to drive value from cost savings or things like that. So, if you can identify what's in your environment, you'll be able to make better choices to determine whether you need to, add some things to be more, agile or nimble, or whether you need to reduce some things because you implemented something that was overkill. So you can make those savings or make those adjustments to ensure that you're driving business value.
Well, this question is from me, and I've seen a lot of organizations that once they get started on the service management journey, where they'll start is with one of the things that's most obvious to them, which is incident management, right? That's the thing everybody knows about because stuff breaks and people call the service desk and get things taken care of. Do you think it would be a better idea to start from the inside out and start with the hard stuff, which is, in configuration management? Where would you start if you were starting cold and fresh? Either one of you can answer that.
So I'll start. Maybe Joy will be able to complement what I say. I think that in its beginnings, you're focusing on the business. So there are going to be escalations. So it's almost inherently natural to start with request and incident because that's what you're dealing with right off the bat. Unfortunately, what happens is people get so good at doing requests and incidents that they put all their eggs in that basket and they never revisit config and how that would pertain to problem, which would then sort out your incidents. So I think that's the challenge, and it sort of becomes one of those things where you have to walk before you can run. And while it would be on paper, it would seem that config would be better. it's probably not going to be as realistic until you identify where your issues really lie and kind of going from there.
Mm-hmm. I couldn't agree more.
Cool. Thank you very much for that. I guess you couldn't hear me nodding while you were giving that answer, right? It's hard to hear me nodding. So let us know if there are any other questions out there. There's one. Is there an orchestration application needed as an additional layer in order to properly understand applications? Joy, that's for you.
No, it's so straightforward. You don't need another layer.
Cool. Easy answer.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And that actual product's name is Discovery? Joy, is that correct?
Discovery, that is correct. And formerly it was known as Atrium Dependency Mapping Discovery for, you guys know it.
Okay, good. Thank you. Well, if there are no further questions, I think we're coming to the end of our presentation. Thank you very much for attending today. Our thanks to Ryan Ogilvie and Joy Sue for being the presenters today. This webcast is copyright 2016 by United Business Media, LLC. The presentation materials are owned by or copyrighted, if that's the case, by HDI, which is solely responsible for its content, and by the individual speakers who are solely responsible for their content and their opinions. On behalf of HDI, we hope that you have a fabulous day, and we hope that you can also join us for our September 20th webinar featuring Matt Hooper, who will be talking about Agile, ITSM, DevOps, and the future. So please do come back. We have a webinar every month, third Tuesday of the month at this hour, and we hope to see you again very soon. Thank you for coming.
Thanks again.